Hello everyone, today I'm going to talk about how China is fiercely criticizing NATO, saying that when you increase your military spending, you don't use me as an excuse. The NATO Secretary General is basically polishing Trump's shoes, calling him dad, but all it gets is the US forcing NATO to massively increase military spending and buy American weapons. A NATO summit has turned into a Trump bootlicking convention. It's really beyond what anyone could have imagined. On June 25th, the NATO summit concluded in The Hague, Netherlands. The NATO member states issued a joint declaration and agreed to raise their defense spending to 5% of their GDP. This outcome left US President Trump, who had repeatedly threatened to withdraw from NATO, very dissatisfied. NATO is an international military alliance led by the United States, but Trump has long been dissatisfied with NATO. When he attended the NATO summit during his first term, the atmosphere was extremely tense. The main reason was that Trump believed the European member states of NATO were contributing too little to defense spending. Many countries' military expenditures didn't even reach 2% of their GDP. He argued that since they paid less, the US had to pay more, or that they were taking advantage of the US, which made Trump very unhappy. But Trump ignored this reality. With the US leading NATO, he can station troops in NATO member countries, and this is the foundation of America's global military dominance. If the US doesn't pay more for defense and send more troops, why would other countries allow American troops to be stationed there? However, Trump is different. If you try to reason with him and he doesn't like it, the other NATO member states get really nervous. And this time, it's Trump's first time attending a NATO summit since 2019. Foreign media have noticed that, unlike the tense atmosphere when Trump attended NATO summits during his first term, this year's summit catered to Trump's wishes and could be described as tailor-made for him. Pleasing and flattering, these have become the key words in foreign media reports. The NATO summit's declaration contains only 5 brief points, which also highlights the dilemma among member states. Professor Li Haidong from the Institute of International Relations at the China Foreign Affairs University told Observer.com that this declaration was tailor-made for Trump. The fact that the summit declaration is so brief precisely indicates that there are deep divisions within NATO, making it impossible to reach consensus on broader issues. Since Trump's first term, he has been urging NATO allies to increase their defense spending, and his demands for each country's military expenditure have only gone up. When he first took office, he asked them to raise their defense budgets to 2% of GDP. During last year's campaign, he mentioned 3.5%, and recently he even said 5%. You could say he's asking for the sky. Today, NATO member countries issued a joint declaration. The leaders of the member states reached an agreement on future military spending, deciding to raise annual defense expenditures to 5% of each country's GDP by 2035. According to the declaration, the 5% defense spending target is mainly divided into 2 parts. 3.5% will go toward core military expenditures, and 1.5% will be allocated to key infrastructure, protection, cybersecurity, and so on. This 1.5% basically means that other infrastructure and so on are also being counted as military spending just to make up the numbers. NATO member countries also agreed to conduct a midterm review of the implementation of this target in 2029 to ensure that the 5% goal is ultimately achieved by 2035. Trump was very pleased with this outcome. At the press conference after the meeting, he said, "This was an extremely successful summit. I really enjoyed it." You could interpret it this way: Trump set this new 5% target as a sky-high opening offer, never expecting NATO to be so obedient and actually come up with a way to meet the goal. How could Trump not be satisfied? Trump was asked to clarify his position on Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. This article refers to NATO's collective defense, meaning if one member country is attacked, the other countries will send troops in support. Trump responded by saying, "I support this article, that's the reason I'm here." Previously, Trump had repeatedly expressed doubts about whether the United States would abide by Article 5 of NATO. Even as recently as June 14, before arriving in The Hague, he said there are many different definitions of Article 5. Now, he seems to have softened his stance, but how much is Trump's promise really worth? That's another question entirely. The Washington Post said that Trump's shift in attitude toward Article 5 is the result of other NATO member states going out of their way to flatter him. And CNN commented that the entire summit was practically tailor-made for Trump. On the eve of the summit, Trump posted on social media a text message sent to him by NATO Secretary General and former Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte. Not only did Rutte inform Trump that he had asked member states in advance to commit to raising their defense budgets to 5% of GDP, he also shamelessly flattered Trump, calling him the best American president in history. Trump, without hesitation, made Rutte's bootlicking private message public. On June 25th, during a bilateral press conference between Rutte and Trump, Rutte's mention of the strict father theory shocked many people even more. Because at the NATO summit on June 25th, Rutte called Trump daddy, adding a touch of levity to the otherwise serious meeting. Trump later responded by saying, "Rutte just affectionately called me daddy. I think he really likes me." When he said this to the reporters, the media present and U.S. Secretary of State Pompeo, who was standing behind Trump, couldn't help but burst out laughing. Trump said that Rutte did indeed affectionately call him daddy just now, but Rutte denied ever calling Trump daddy. He explained, "What I actually meant was, in Europe we sometimes hear different countries ask me whether America is still with us, at least, and at that moment I would say, it sounds just like a child asking his daddy, are you going to stay at home?" He said he used the word daddy from that perspective, and wasn't actually calling Trump daddy. Honestly, is there really any need to clarify this kind of bootlicking description from Rutte? To most people, Rutte's behavior could be described as completely lacking in dignity. Tausig, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and former NATO policy advisor at the U.S. Department of Defense, said that this NATO Secretary General is very aware that when dealing with Trump, personal relationships are absolutely crucial. This is one of those moments where you just have to hold your nose and endure it, make sure the summit goes smoothly without any trouble, take a few photos, and then everyone can go home for vacation. Some European officials privately expressed strong dissatisfaction with this overly obsequious behavior. He said that everyone felt very awkward. Overall, the summit was a success, but the atmosphere of excessive flattery was really over the top. Switching to the Australian edition of the news, it says that besides Rutte, other NATO leaders also had to lavish praise on Trump. For example, the pro-Trump president of Poland said upon arrival that this was Trump's achievement, that it was he who demanded NATO countries increase their defense spending. It's also worth mentioning that the NATO summit declaration this time contained only 5 points. Professor Lee Haidong from the Foreign Affairs University commented that such a brief NATO summit declaration is truly rare. In contrast, the 2024 NATO Washington Summit Declaration had 38 points, and even listed 6 separate items specifically for providing long-term security assistance to Ukraine. A year earlier, in 2023, the communiqué released after the NATO Vienna summit was even longer, with 90 points. In Lee Haidong's view, this current declaration indicates that there are significant divisions within NATO, and it is very difficult for all parties to find many issues on which they can reach consensus. Observers have noticed that this summit declaration pays noticeably less attention to the Ukraine issue. In the declaration, the topic is glossed over, with no mention of Ukraine joining NATO, and the wording about Russian aggression against Ukraine, which was often seen in previous summit declarations, is also absent. It can be summed up like this. First, Stoltenberg and European leaders' bootlicking behavior toward Trump is embarrassing. Stoltenberg's pessimism and disappointment in order to keep his own job have made it clear that these Western politicians have no dignity at all. Second, Trump's strategy of intimidating people everywhere has actually worked. After the last spending summit, he lashed out at French President Macron, calling him a president who just wants to be famous. This time, Macron kept quiet and just let Trump put on a show. Third, in fact, quite a few NATO member states are unwilling to increase their military spending. For example, Spanish Prime Minister Sanchez made it clear last week that they won't do so. Spain will only raise its military spending to 2.1% of GDP, no more, no less, because that's already enough to meet NATO's set military capability targets. Countries like Belgium and Slovenia have also started to push for more flexibility regarding military spending. They oppose the 5% spending target, but just didn't voice it publicly at the meeting. Maybe because so many countries are against it, the NATO summit declaration started playing word games. It only mentions member states, not all member states. By reaching a consensus on the 5% target, this wording leaves room for flexible interpretation by each country. In addition, on June 15, NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg said that, considering the long-term threat posed by Russia and the significant expansion of China's military power, it is necessary for all EU and NATO members to increase their military spending. Stoltenberg's attempt to drag China into this issue angered China. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning stated at a press conference on June 26 that certain individuals should not hype up international and regional tensions or undermine China's normal relationship building. Ultimately, this is just an excuse for NATO to drastically increase its military spending, recklessly expand its authority beyond its boundaries, and seek a pretext to advance eastward into the Asia-Pacific. Mao Ning questioned, in 2024, NATO member countries' military spending already accounts for 55% of global military expenditures. Now, they are demanding that member states significantly increase their defense spending to 5% of their own GDP, claiming they want to build a more lethal NATO. What exactly are they trying to achieve? He said that although NATO claims to be a regional organization, it keeps overstepping the geographical boundaries set by its own charter, using the pretext of Euro-Asian security linkage to continually reach out to Asia-Pacific countries. The international community sees this very clearly, and Asia-Pacific countries are highly alert to it. It can be summed up like this. First, the United States is forcing NATO countries to increase their military spending in order to reduce the costs of stationing American troops in Europe. Additionally, the US hopes to sell more arms to European countries, and this will be reflected in America's tariff negotiations with these countries. America's actions are full of self-interest. Second, NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, geographically meant to defend Europe. It was a product of the confrontation between Eastern and Western Europe back in the day, and it has absolutely nothing to do with China, which is thousands of miles away. Now, just to echo America's political slogans, they're forcibly dragging China into the mix as an excuse to pressure European countries to increase military spending. This is truly shameful.